David doesn't get to build the temple. It has been a dream for him to do that. He would love to express his gratitude to God in this tangible, beautiful, selfless, generous way. But he's just been told he is not permitted to build the house of God. God will build the house of David, not a physical one, but a biological one. And through his family line will come the King of all kings, who we know to be the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, David could have thrown his toys out of his pram at this point. He could have said, I have the power, I have the ability, I have the desire, I have the resources, I have the time, and we, the people, have the peace, the talent, the treasure to do this. So we're going to go ahead and do it. He could have said that, but instead he responds with great humility and great wisdom. He doesn't get to fulfill his own plans and ambitions for himself, but he's got work to do, and he does what he is called to do well. And his work will clear the path for the next generation to go further and do better. He has two great tasks then: win wars and gather gold. And do you see that if he succeeds in those tasks, the next generation will have been greatly blessed by his work? We'll come back to that thought in just a moment. So in chapter 8 then, we read about David going out into battle against the Philistines and subduing them. We read that in this campaign, he took Metheg Ammah from control of the Philistines. That, by the way, is another title for the place called Gath. It is Goliath's old hometown. David also defeated the Moabites. Here we read about a rather unusual method of subduing them. It certainly seems to our sensibilities to be very brutal. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with a length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death, and the 3rd length was allowed to live. So in other words, he reduced their population down to 1/3 of its size, rather than simply destroying them altogether. Some would say that the Moabites, as historic enemies of God's people, were ripe for judgment, and so although all of them deserved to die, instead he allowed 1/3 to live. That is a fair way of looking at it, I think, and it is gracious that he allows 1/3 to live, but I think the method does seem unpalatable to us. Either way. Next we read, he defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. This, as we'll see from the following verses, seems to be a particularly impressive feat. Hadadezer, it seems, had an alliance with the Arameans. One of us goes to war, the other will come and join. If one of us is attacked, the other will come to defend. And so we read that the Arameans came to help Hadadezer, but alas, they could not stand against David because the Lord was working through him. As we read, the Lord gave David victory wherever he went. Through all these endeavors, David is achieving 2 things: peace and prosperity. And both of these things are gifts that will be given to the next generation. See from verse 7, the riches that David acquires through these conquests. David took the gold shields that belonged to the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. He also takes a great quantity of bronze. Now, Hadadezer has an ally and an enemy. We read that Tau, king of Hamath, had been at war with Hadadezer, and David has swept in and he's won the war. And so verse 10, he sent his son Joram to King David to greet him and congratulate him on his victory against Hadadezer, who he had been at war against too. Joram brought articles of silver and of gold and of bronze. Now, David could have simply enriched himself. He could have used all these resources to magnify the splendor of his palace or magnify the extent of his own personal pleasure. Instead, he does neither. He dedicates all this wealth to the Lord. That is to say, he sets it aside for the future use of his son, King Solomon, and the eventual construction of the temple. And what a wonderful, selfless, God-honoring thing for David to do. As we said earlier, David did not get to fulfill all of his own heart's desires, but do you see how his actions in chapter 8 pave the way for the next generation to succeed? His son, Solomon, will now have the peace required to be able to focus his energy on this huge task, building the temple. And he will have the prosperity required to focus on this great task, the building of the temple. Something perhaps for us to think about today is that there are many things that we might want to do for the Lord in our generation, many great advances that we would want to do with our own hands and see in our own day, and that's great. But it might be that our timing is not the Lord's timing, and our plan is not the Lord's plan, and if that's the case, then we must be patient. But that doesn't mean we don't have work to do. David worked hard and did all he could while he could, so that the next generation under Solomon would enjoy the temple and the presence of God. What can we do in our day to do our best to make sure that the generations after us will succeed? May God help us to see ways in which we could be generous, big-hearted, selfless, well-motivated, so that generations that come after us will be better resourced, better equipped, better enabled to take the baton from us and run further and faster than we ever dreamed possible by the grace of God and for His glory.